I'm a social worker who helped a single father fight for custody of his child, and along the way I realized the true meaning of resilience. I work at a small nonprofit organization that provides legal and social support to low-income families in suburban areas. Our team is tiny but dedicated, and we wear multiple hats daily. From writing grants to organizing food drives, my main role is to help families navigate the tangled web of the legal system. It's not glamorous work, especially when you're juggling limited resources, but it's necessary. Most of our cases involve child custody battles, eviction prevention, or advocating for victims of domestic abuse. It was during one of these custody cases that I met Mike. A single father, Mike walked into our office on a freezing November morning, looking as if the weight of the world was balanced precariously on his shoulders. He was tall but slouched, as though life had beaten the straightness out of his spine. His eyes were bloodshot from exhaustion, his work boots were caked in mud, and his jacket barely looked warm enough to keep the chill at bay. He clutched a folder filled with crumpled papers in one hand and a beaten-up thermos in the other. "I need help," he said, voice cracking under the strain. "They took my daughter." Mike's story spilled out in fragments, a patchwork quilt of hardship and heartbreak. He had been working as a welder in a small fabrication shop, barely making enough to keep a roof over his and his daughter Lily's heads. "Lily was 6, smart as a whip and tougher than me," he said with a sad chuckle, but their stability crumbled when Mike lost his job after an injury left him unable to meet the shop's demanding physical requirements. Unemployment checks helped for a while, but they weren't enough. He fell behind on rent, and soon enough, an eviction notice appeared on his door. He and Lily moved into his truck for a couple of weeks, a temporary solution that turned into months. "It was better than the shelters," Mike said, looking down at his hands. "I could at least keep her safe. I made sure she got to school every day. That was the one thing I never let slip." But one night, a concerned teacher noticed Lily coming to school with unwashed clothes and dark circles under her eyes. She called Child Protective Services, and within days, Lily was placed in temporary custody. Mike was devastated. "They told me it wasn't permanent," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "They said I just needed to prove I could take care of her, but how the hell am I supposed to do that when I'm living out of my damn truck?" Mike had already taken steps to get back on his feet. He'd enrolled in parenting classes, signed up for job training, and was working odd construction jobs whenever he could find them. But the system is a labyrinth, and the demands placed on parents like Mike can feel insurmountable. He had no lawyer, no family support, and no idea how to navigate the mountain of paperwork and deadlines CPS handed him. As he recounted the story, he kept pulling out the crumpled papers from his folder, trying to organize them on the desk in front of me. His hands shook slightly, and he paused every few minutes to sip from his thermos. When he opened it, I caught the scent of weak coffee, his lifeline, I imagined. On sleepless nights, I assured him he was in the right place. "We're going to fight for Lily," I said. "One step at a time." Mike's case was a textbook example of how the system can feel stacked against those already at rock bottom. The reunification plan outlined by CPS was theoretically straightforward: secure stable housing, maintain employment, attend parenting classes, and prove he could provide a safe environment for Lily. But in practice, it felt like an impossible checklist for a man living paycheck to paycheck out of a truck. Housing was the first hurdle. Most landlords wouldn't consider him without a permanent job or significant savings for a deposit. The job training program Mike had joined was promising, but it would be weeks before he'd see steady income, and temporary jobs didn't provide the stability landlords wanted. I helped him fill out applications for low-income housing and scoured lists of local programs that could provide assistance. Every evening, I'd hear from him about the latest rejection. "They look at me like I'm already a failure," he said. "Like I don't even deserve a chance." His determination, though, never wavered. Mike made every court date, even if it meant working overnight shifts beforehand. He never missed a single class, showing up early and taking notes like he was preparing for an exam. I'd call the instructors afterward to check on his progress, and they always praised his engagement and eagerness to learn, but the setbacks kept coming. His truck broke down one morning, leaving him stranded and unable to make a meeting with his caseworker. "That's another strike against me," he muttered when he called to explain. "They probably think I just didn't care enough to show up." I drove to pick him up that day and took him to the meeting myself. On the way back, he sat in the passenger seat, looking out the window, as if trying to find answers in the gray winter sky. "It's not just about Lily," he said softly. "She's my whole reason to keep going. But every time I think I've made progress, it feels like I'm back to square one." I could see the toll it was taking on him, on his body, his spirit. But if he was tired, he didn't let it stop him. Every setback was met with a deep breath and another attempt. He even started offering to help other parents in his parenting class, sitting with them after sessions to explain concepts they didn't understand. "If I'm gonna fight this fight," he told me once, "I might as well help someone else along the way." As we worked through his case, I realized my role wasn't just about paperwork and deadlines. I became his advocate, his cheerleader, and sometimes his sounding board when the weight of it all felt too much. And the more I watched him fight, the more I understood resilience in its purest form. Progress came in increments, like drops filling a bucket. The first big breakthrough was housing. After dozens of applications and phone calls, one landlord finally gave Mike a chance. It wasn't a glamorous apartment. It was a tiny, two-bedroom unit on the edge of town, but it was warm, safe, and most importantly, his. I'll never forget the phone call when he told me he'd signed the lease. His voice was steady, but I could hear the emotion bubbling just below the surface. "Lily's gonna have her own room," he said, almost in disbelief. "It's not much, but she'll have a bed." Her bed. We worked together to furnish the place. Between donations from local charities and some elbow grease, we cobbled together a cozy space. I even found a used bunk bed set for Lily. When we assembled it, Mike stood back and just stared at it for a moment before whispering, "She's gonna love this." Next came the job. The construction training program paid off when Mike landed a full-time position with benefits. It wasn't his dream job, but it was steady work, and it brought him a step closer to proving he could provide stability. "I don't care if I'm digging holes or laying bricks," he said, grinning for the first time in weeks. "As long as it gets me one step closer to getting my girl back." But it wasn't all victories. Lily's temporary placement with a foster family had created a bond that complicated matters. During supervised visits, Lily sometimes seemed distant, unsure of where she belonged. "She's starting to call her foster mom, Mom," Mike confided one day, his voice cracking. "I know it's not her fault, but God, it hurts." In those moments, Mike's love for Lily was undeniable. He'd bring her little gifts, a coloring book, a stuffed animal, or sometimes just her favorite candy, and watch her light up. He never let his sadness show in front of her, always keeping a smile plastered on his face. Once, during a visit, Lily ran up to him holding a drawing she'd made. It was a stick figure family, her, Mike, and a little house with flowers outside. "This is us, Daddy," she said. He held on to that drawing like it was a treasure map. "That's why I'm doing all this," he told me later, his voice firm. "So I can be the dad she deserves." I could see the strain in his every movement, the way he carried the burden of proving himself to a system that seemed designed to doubt him. But every small victory brought a flicker of hope, enough to keep him going. It was during one of Mike's supervised visits with Lily that I saw the depth of his resilience shine through. Lily had brought a school project to show him, a shoebox diorama of her dream day. Inside were cut-out paper trees, a blue construction paper sky, and a little picnic blanket with stick figures drawn on it. She explained that it was her and Mike having a picnic at the park, just the two of them. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Mike said, beaming as he crouched beside her. "When you come home, we'll make this dream day happen for real." Her face lit up. "Promise?" she asked, her big, hopeful eyes staring into his. "Cross my heart," he said, drawing an imaginary X over his chest. I stood in the corner, observing like I always did during these visits, trying to remain invisible. But something about that moment hit me. It was the way Mike spoke with so much conviction, as if there wasn't a single doubt in his mind that they'd be together again. He wasn't just saying it for her sake, he truly believed it. Or maybe he needed to believe it to keep going. Later that day, as I drove him back to his apartment, he told me, "You know, Lily's got every reason to be mad at me for all this. But she doesn't. She just trusts me. That's what scares me the most. What if I let her down?" "You won't," I said firmly. "You've done everything they've asked of you. More than that, even." He sighed, staring out the window at the passing streets. Sometimes I feel like I'm fighting against an ocean, trying to swim to a shore I can't even see. You're not swimming alone, I reminded him. There were moments when the strain showed. At one point, Mike came to a meeting with bags under his eyes, clearly on the edge. I just got off a double shift, he admitted, dropping heavily into a chair. I'm so damn tired. Take a breath, I told him. Rest is part of resilience too. He laughed, a short, humorless sound. Rest? I'll rest when Lily's home. Despite everything, Mike found small ways to remind himself of the life he was fighting for. He hung Lily's drawings on his fridge and kept one of her hair ties looped around his wrist. Once, when I came by to drop off some donated kitchen supplies, I found him sewing a button onto one of Lily's dresses he'd been saving for her. His hands were clumsy, and he muttered a string of curses under his breath as the thread kept tangling, but he didn't give up. I'm not much good at this domestic stuff, he said, flashing me an embarrassed grin. But it's for her. So I'll figure it out. Seeing him like that, focused, stubborn, unwilling to let even the smallest detail fall through the cracks, taught me something about resilience I hadn't understood before. It wasn't just about surviving or enduring. It was about the quiet, determined effort to rebuild, piece by piece, no matter how many times life knocked you down. The custody hearing felt like the culmination of every struggle Mike had faced. He showed up in a borrowed suit, the tie slightly askew, clutching a folder filled with every document and receipt we had meticulously compiled. His hands trembled as he straightened his jacket, but his face was calm, resolved. You ready for this? I asked him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. I have to be, he replied. For her. The courtroom was cold, both in temperature and atmosphere. The CPS caseworker presented their report, outlining both Mike's progress and their concerns. They acknowledged that he had secured stable housing and employment, but emphasized the challenges he would face as a single parent. The foster parents also spoke, expressing their affection for Lily and their belief that she had flourished in their care. Mike listened intently, his jaw tight, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. When it was Mike's turn to speak, he stood and addressed the judge. His voice was steady, though thick with emotion. Your Honor, he began, I'm not a perfect man, but I am a father who loves his daughter more than anything in this world. I've done everything you've asked of me. I got a job. I found a home. I've taken every class, met every requirement. I've done all of it because I want to give Lily the life she deserves, a life with her dad. He paused, glancing down at the table before continuing. Lily's a fighter, just like her dad. She didn't give up on me, and I'll never give up on her. I'm asking you for a chance to show her that we can have the life we dreamed of. As he spoke, I felt a lump form in my throat. I had spent months watching Mike claw his way out of the depths of despair, but hearing him lay it all bare in that courtroom was something else entirely. It was raw, honest, and utterly moving. The judge deliberated for what felt like an eternity, the silence in the room broken only by the shuffle of papers. Finally, they delivered their decision. Custody would be returned to Mike, with a 6-month probationary period during which CPS would monitor his progress. Mike's reaction was immediate. He slumped into his chair, covering his face with his hands as his shoulders shook. At first, I thought he was crying, but then I realized he was laughing deep, relieved laughter that spilled out like he had been holding it in for years. Thank you, he whispered, looking up at me with tears in his eyes. Thank you for everything. The day Mike brought Lily home was unseasonably sunny for early spring. He had called me that morning, his voice crackling with both excitement and nerves. I've got everything ready, he said. I even baked cookies. They're a little crispy, but I think she'll like them. When I stopped by his apartment that afternoon, the transformation was remarkable. The once bare walls were now adorned with Lily's drawings and a few colorful posters. The bunk bed was made up with bright pink sheets, and a new bookshelf was stocked with stories she had loved before the separation. On the small kitchen table sat a plate of slightly overcooked cookies, a glass of milk beside it. When Lily arrived, her initial shyness melted away as soon as she saw the space he had prepared for her. This is all for me, she asked, her eyes wide. Every bit of it, Mike said, kneeling down to her level. Welcome home, sweetheart. I watched from the doorway as she hugged him tightly, her small arms wrapping around his neck. It was as though all the trials, the sleepless nights, the mountain of obstacles, had been leading to this moment. Later, as I said my goodbyes, Mike walked me to the door. He looked lighter, as though the weight he had been carrying for months had finally lifted. "I don't think I could have done this without you," he said. "I'll never forget what you've done for me and Lily." "You're the one who did the work," I reminded him. "I just helped you find the way." As I drove away, I reflected on everything Mike had taught me. Resilience, I realized, isn't just about bouncing back from hardship. It's about finding strength in the love you have for someone else, using it as a beacon when everything else feels hopeless. Mike's journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges ahead, but if anyone had proven they could rise to meet them, it was him. And as for me, I went home that night feeling a renewed sense of purpose. I've worked with dozens of families over the years, but this case stayed with me. It reminded me why I chose this work in the first place, to witness and sometimes help ignite the quiet triumphs of the human spirit.